Welcome everyone to our very first virtual QWEL in Aspen Continuing Education Unit course. And this course is entitled Tools for Improving Irrigation System Efficiency. Next slide, Doug. So I'm joined today by our speakers. We've got Bob Howie and Doug Smith with Irrigation Analysis, who many, if not all of you, know, as well as Rob Greger, Aspen's Utilities Permit Coordinator, who you all have probably interacted with as well. And before we get into the meat of the presentations, I thought since we do have a small group, we can go ahead and run through our folks on the line. So I would just go ahead and ask that you give us your name and tell us something about your role in the landscape irrigation efficiency world. And I will try, with the names that I have available, I'll try to run through our list here. So Rick, why don't we start with you?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, Rick McGill. I'm the plans reviewer for the water efficient landscaping standards for the city of Aspen. I work closely with Rob and others at the Parks Department. I've been doing this for almost 2.5 years.
Perfect, thanks Rick. Okay, Mary Ferguson.
Yes, good morning. Mary Ferguson, of course. I work with the city of Aspen in the utilities department with Rob. And basically this is more on a knowledge end of things for me because I take a lot of the frontline phone calls that come into the plant, a lot of questions regarding different rules and regulations, et cetera. And if I can answer questions firsthand versus passing people around to a million different people, it helps everyone.
Thanks, Mary. I don't have a full name here, but it's an A Mazarak, or maybe that's a full last name.
Hi, everybody. I'm Allie Mazurik. I work for Northern Water in their water efficiency department. And a number of our programs, we consult with commercial properties on irrigation best practices. So I thought this would be helpful for that.
Thanks, Allie. Amber Clark.
Hi, I'm Amber Clark. I'm with Hydro Systems KDI, principal and designer doing irrigation design.
Perfect. Thanks, Amber. Brett Eastberg.
Hi, Brett Eastberg. I work at City of Westminster. I'm the Reclaim Water coordinator for the city, run the Reclaim Water program. Do a lot of work with conservation, with HOAs, and trying to get them to do the right thing, better things. So that's my role with the city.
Excellent. Brandy Rice.
Morning, Brandy Rice with Norris Design. I'm a landscape architect, mostly focusing on water efficient landscape design and focusing on plants and turf reduction and how we can conserve water through design.
Excellent. Brandy is also one of the instructors for our upcoming QWEL course in November. And I will turn it over to Chad.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chad Kuhnel. I work with Northern Water in our water efficiency group, along with Allie. Work heavily with our grant program where we help HOAs and commercial properties, municipal properties try to save water. Background in landscape horticulture.
Excellent. Joanne Teeple.
I'm Joanne Teeple. I'm an independent person advising individuals on their landscape and water use.
Excellent. Thanks for joining us, Joanne.
Thank you.
And Linda Gold.
Hi, I'm Linda Gould. I work in the conservation department for Castle Rock Water. I am also a QWEL trainer and looking forward to seeing how this CEU class goes today.
Thanks, Linda. Valeska Estrada.
Hi, my name is Valeska Strada. I'm with Earthwise Industries, and we are a water efficient landscaping company.
Excellent, thank you. I see an Patty.
Hi there. I don't know if you can hear me. My name is Sean Solon.
We can hear you.
I work with, my name is Sean Solon. I work with Fitzgerald Landscaping. I'm the in-house irrigation guy with the company. And we do a lot of maintenance of irrigation systems. And as part of that, we do upgrades. And we also install irrigation systems from scratch for the build. We're just to be as water efficient as possible and install, QWEL systems. So that's what I do.
Thank you. Let's see. I think that's the end of the names that I can see, but there's a couple of phone numbers and Zoom users. So has anyone else not introduced themselves? Just go ahead and jump in.
John Stubel here from CPS Distributors out of Grand Junction.
Hey, John. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Anyone else we missed? Okay, great. So just a couple of logistical items here. I just ask that you all, the participants, stay muted when you're not speaking to make sure that we don't get feedback during the presentation. And then it's totally your call whether you'd like to have your video on or not. That's up to you. Okay, let's go next slide. Quick overview of our agenda. So we're first going to dive into a review on distribution uniformity and at a high level how we perform an irrigation audit, and we'll do a review and see a video of an audit in practice. This pretty closely follows class 7 of the QWEL curriculum. That will probably take us right up to about noon, where we'll do a 30-minute break for you to grab a quick lunch or stretch your legs. And then when we get back, we'll hear from Rob Greger about Aspen's water efficient landscape standards and specifically the WELS irrigation audit requirements. And then we'll spend the remainder of the training on sort of new tools and technologies for, you know, what happens, say, if your DU is not as high as you'd like and you want to try to improve your system efficiency. Next slide.
Hey, Lindsay, I think we may have Rob's part in front of the break, but I think that is where it landed in the presentation. But anyway.
Yeah, we'll decide. We'll see where we are around noon, and we might have Rob go before or after the break. So as you guys know, for our QWEL graduates on the line, which I think is most of you, this counts as 2 CEU credits, and the QWEL website was recently updated so that if you attend and participate in this whole training, I will automatically enter you to receive those credits in the database, and that means that you're all set to maintain your QWEL certification through the end of 2021. So I would just ask that you participate in the full webinar in order to receive those credits. Next slide. So how we're going to handle questions. If you have a burning question that comes up during the presentation, feel free to submit it in the chat box. You can enter a question and it will go to everyone to see that question, and then we'll take a pause and address that. And then we'll have more time at the end of the presentation for Q&A, which we can have more of a discussion-based Q&A. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob and Doug to get us started.
Thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, like Lindsay said, I mean, if you have a question as we go, we'll try to, answer those as we go. But at the same time, if, you want to hold that question, you can hold that question. And we might say, let's catch that at the end or something too. So, but yeah, please, it's supposed to be interactive, and I think everybody's going to get the most out of this if you're putting out questions and thoughts as we go through this. So what we're doing today is going through section 7, which is just review of irrigation system auditing, and you guys should all have your books. I mean, or can go dust them off or whatever if you need to refer to them. But we're running through that just so that everybody's kind of, thinking, kind of fresh in that, or fresher again, refresher. And then we're going to talk kind of later, both about the Aspen Wells program, so that good opportunity to kind of introduce that, ask questions on that again if you have any questions, and then we're going to talk about how to, if you're needing to improve your DU distribution uniformity, how to do that. And I think that'll be another really good opportunity to kind of have some back and forth and talk about some of the issues that we run into. So going to kind of fly just again, since it is a lot of review, but we are covering a lot of the same material, but again, you probably haven't looked at it for a while. So this is, and the audit's a really key part of both the Aspen Wells program as well as QWEL program and other water providers that are out there that are requiring or want to see DU for their projects. So purpose of irrigation system auditing is really not one single purpose. So it's these three purposes, but it also could be just for a given purpose within that. So most of the auditing we do is multi-purpose, several of these things, but usually at least two, but it can just be for one purpose. But anyway, the purpose, as it says there, is to assess how effective an irrigation system is, to develop an irrigation schedule, and to suggest system improvements or efficiency improvements through, actively inspecting and auditing an irrigation system. So we wanted to just go over the terms for distribution uniformity and irrigation efficiency. Let's see. So yeah, distribution uniformity is a measurement of how evenly water is applied to a hydrozone. Again, pretty straightforward. It kind of gets a lot of times thought of, that's how efficient my system is. It's not exactly true. I mean, it's kind of an idea of how efficient it is. It gives you good thought along those lines, but there is a difference between DU and irrigation efficiency. But again, it a lot of times is kind of, they are correlated, and it's important to know the differences. So the irrigation efficiency is the ratio of volume of water that is beneficially applied to the plants in the hydrozone to the volume of irrigation water that it's applied. So you can have things that affect the both the DU and the irrigation efficiency, and so we're going to look at that again as a review. Obviously, a high DU, distribution uniformity, is kind of what we're looking at here. High DU is preferable because it's showing that you're evenly and sufficiently irrigating the root zone. And that there then leads to that the plants look good, you don't have a lot of stress. And if it's DU is low, your system's not operating and irrigating uniformly and evenly, then you have to make up for that by either overwatering or underwatering given areas of a hydrozone to kind of counterbalance or try to make up for that. And that's where you start, really wasting water, where you're watering heavily a dry spot and overwatering a dry spot so that it's, greens up, while at the same time the area that's properly irrigated or is even already a wet spot is even made more wet or wetter than it needs to be. And so that's where the issue comes.
This kind of shows that.
Yeah. So again, kind of a recap from when we were all in class together, you get that excessive watering, and that top is if water's going below the root zone of the turf in most cases we're talking about. So if water goes below that, it's lost, it's wasted, and it's not used beneficially. So, but you do need to wet the root zone. So the lower slide there is, you end up with areas of insufficient watering, the dry spots basically, and where plant material stress. So poor DU from just not having uniform coverage. So all right, so irrigation efficiency and DU are different. As I said minute ago. It takes other factors into account when you're talking about irrigation efficiency. So overspray, runoff, and runtime of the irrigation system are just some of the things, some of the major factors that affect the irrigation efficiency, or IE. So a system can have a good DU score, but like we'll say the catch cups can have a pretty equal or uniform amount of water in them, but you can still have a low irrigation efficiency because there's overspray happening, if that makes sense. So again, if you guys have any questions, fire those off to us. So another way you can lose your water and have a low irrigation efficiency is when you are overwatering and there's watering going below the root zone. That extra water is lost and percolating and not beneficial to the plants. So that's a low, even though you could have a good, nice uniform layer of water in there, the darker part of the slide, but the water below the dashed line is really not necessary and being wasted and used. I think a lot of this goes on in Aspen, just from what we've seen up there, because when you're watering 6 and 7 days a week, a lot of that water's going down and going through the root zone, even though it may not be squishy or wet on top. So, can back that off to, 3 or 4 days a week should be pretty doable if your system is tuned up and operating uniformly, have a good DU. Hydrozone with a good DU and good irrigation efficiency is what we're going for, and that's at the bottom of the slide. That's the ideal or the optimal.
So some typical uniformity numbers, and this just comes from either catalogs or in-field tests, but there's kind of a range. Drip irrigation, that's a whole nother topic. We're going to discuss a couple of slides on drip, but it's not really a very uniform sprinkler type, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But anyway, the rotating sprinklers are between 0.55, 0.85. Another name for rotating sprinklers are rotary sprays or rotary stream nozzles. And those are the multi-stream nozzles that you've seen, like the MP rotators. The rotors are between 5.5 and 8.5 also. Again, they're just a rotor, but they'd have a single stream that oscillates back and forth. And then spray sprinklers can really vary between 0.45 and 0.75. On occasion, you can even get that up a little bit higher if you have really good spacing and all the conditions are just right. Conversely, it can go quite a bit lower than 0.45 as well. So the importance of head-to-head coverage and uniformity is crucial. So the way that the sprinkler heads are built, they're trying to deliver water quite a distance away from the head, and so you have to get a lot of that water away from the head to cover a much larger area. So if you were looking at the spray patterns here, and here this would represent your head in the center, you're going to have a lot more water falling from gravity, in these smaller areas around, and the farther you get out, the larger the area is. So you have to get a lot more water out there, and that's why when you look at a sprinkler head, it looks like the water is all going out towards the end, when in fact most of it's actually falling around the head. So if you have cups lined up in a sprinkler profile, most of the water is going to land, I should go this way, but closer to the head, and then that's why you need the backup head to kind of even that out. And we've got a slide to show that here in a minute.
Hey, Doug, on that, I think back to that. So it's pretty, I think most of the participants are, that are, actively involved with this, and, obviously understand the head-to-head coverage and all that, because that's a very kind of fundamental irrigation principle. But again, to kind of, even to like a homeowner that doesn't know, or somebody that is less informed about that, it's like, it's like you could pull those circles apart, and if the spray patterns would overlap or touch each other, it's like, oh, I'm getting enough water in there. And so again, but that's incorrect, obviously. And so again, head-to-head coverage it's not really intuitive, I guess, as much, because it looks like, well, I'm getting water on all my grass, but it's again, really would be a poor DU in that situation. So
Yeah, yep. Okay, so here are some of the causes of the poor DU and irrigation efficiency. So overspray would be a cause of efficiency. So the water is not hitting the target area, and therefore it's wasted, and that relates to poor efficiency. A tilted head would be could be both if your water is not getting to the target area, but generally that would be a uniformity issue because the trajectory of the spray coming out of the nozzle is designed to come at a certain degree, and if that is tilted, it's not going to hit the radius or the arc that it needs. Obviously, a head below grade here, and that's a very common problem that we see in the field. Is just over time the heads look like they become sunken or buried, and that's usually because the ground around it builds up over time. But the bottom line is that if that spray pattern gets interrupted at all, then your uniformity is going to drop. Leaking seals or low head drainage, that's an efficiency issue. Again, we're losing water out through the pipes, and so every time the sprinklers come on, we have to refill the pipes. And then the same with missing emitters and a severed drip line. They're just open, inefficient water use. One of the other things too could be if we had a clogged head, if this was a clogged nozzle and it looks like we're not getting enough water here, sometimes it'll just be turned up rather than fixed. And so then everything else gets overwatered. So okay, we're going to move into precipitation rates and matched precipitation rates. The precipitation rate is the rate at which water is applied. It's usually in inches per hour. And then there's two different measurements of that. You have the gross and the net. So the gross precipitation rate is how much water is going through your hydrozone and to what size of an area. And the net is how much is actually hitting your target area. So the differences again would be the water loss due to leaks. Hopefully, if you're doing it an audit, you're going to find the leaks and get those fixed ahead of time. But overspray, runoff, wind drift, high pressure, anything like that will affect the net precipitation rate. Okay, so we talked about typical DU values a couple slides ago. Now it's typical precipitation rate values. And so we have the fixed spray sprinklers, can be anywhere from 1 to 2 inches, depending on the nozzle and the spacing. Rotating sprinklers, rotary sprays, 0.4 to 0.6, and rotors 0.25 to 1.5. They have inline drip on here again, and so with the precipitation rate, you can calculate a precipitation rate with inline drip because all you're doing is counting how much water is going to a particular area. It's just that it's not super uniform, and we'll talk about that. Point source drip depends on the emitter placement, and I don't know how many times I've been in the field or on an inspection where the landscaper will have 4 emitters, but they tie them all to the root ball, to the stem of the root ball, and that doesn't really, it's not where the root zone is going to be. But so that's going to impact the precipitation rate because you have a smaller area and all the emitters are in one small area. And then low volume bubblers, it depends on the flow rate, and again, those just kind of flood out, so it's kind of, again, you're just measuring flow rate and the area to get that gross precipitation rate. Okay, matched precipitation rate is another crucial part of uniform delivery to the target. So if you have a 90-degree arc that is flowing 0.21, then it makes sense that a 180-degree arc, which is going to cover twice the area, must have twice the flow. And so on with the 360 would be twice of the 180. And then that would equate to the same precipitation rate. And this is the key that we're after right here. So unmatched would be if the arcs all have the same flow coming out of the nozzle. For example, if you were to buy a case of your favorite rotor sprinklers, when they come from the factory, they're probably all going to have a certain nozzle in there. And if you install those heads and then change the arcs out in the field without changing the nozzles, that's a real easy way to get this type of unmatched precipitation rate. So you'd have a 90 degree with this says 15 gallons, but you get the point. So your precipitation rate is going to increase for the smaller arc because you've got the same flow going in a smaller area. Okay, how to calculate that? A good way to get the gross precipitation rate is by just using the manufacturer's catalogs. They have a lot of good information in there. Of course, there's some equations that we can use as well to figure that out. But everyone's a little bit different. There's some that are close, but you might, if you're doing it, you want to use the same brand, model, nozzle, and so forth, and make sure that you're using the right water pressures. This says static water pressure, but it's really going to be operating water pressure, which would be also called dynamic. And then the spacing and the spacing pattern is also very important to determine that precipitation rate. So here's a shot of one of the catalogs. This happens to be the MP rotator. And you can see that they have for the different arc patterns here, the different flow rates. And then you'll also notice that there is a bold line, and most all of the manufacturers have a bold line or a shaded line or something like that in their catalog. And that just indicates their recommended operating pressure. So for the MP rotator, it's 40 PSI. And you can see that we have a 14-foot radius on this 1000 series nozzle. And as we go down to the 180, it's also 14 feet and also 14 feet for the 360, but our flow rates increase, okay? So what they've done here is they tell us what the flow is in gallon per hour, but we really want gallons per minute. And they have a precipitation rate in inches per hour in a square pattern and in a triangular spacing pattern. And so as we go down here, you can see that they give us the 0.41 for the precipitation rate in square, and it's slightly heavier because the heads are closer together in a triangular pattern. So it's a little higher precipitation rate. Here's how you can calculate the precipitation rate for inline drip line. And again, it's the same. You're just counting the emitter flow and the emitter spacing and then the row spacing. So it's very similar. It's just the flow and the spacing. So in this case, it's gallons per hour. So you'd have a little different conversion factor to use, but it's the same result. So for the gross precipitation rate, you need to know the total flow of the hydrozone. So you can count it up, count all the heads, count all the nozzle, the gallons per minute per nozzle, and then the area, and then that's how we're going to be able to do this. So there's a more accurate way to measure it using a water meter, which would be to actually run the zone, take the meter reading before and after, and then convert that. Then that way you'll have exactly how much flow went through that meter, so that if the catalog data might be off a little bit, or the nozzles are just operating at a little different pressure or something like that, you'll have the exact amount of water that went through that meter. Okay, so the general formulas are precipitation rate equals 96.3, which is a constant, and that is always used to calculate your precipitation rate, times the gallons per minute of the flow zone, and divided by the hydrozone area. So that will give you your gross precipitation rate. But there's also another way you can do that too, because if you don't know the total area, or it's harder to calculate exactly how many square feet there are, you can also use that 96.3 times the gallons per minute of a full circle nozzle, of the heads that you have in that area. And then below, for the area, you just do the spacing. So it'd be the spacing squared. And if it's a square layout, then you would do spacing times spacing. And if it's a triangular layout, it's spacing times 0.866. But anyway, my point is that you can do this a little different way without having to know the entire area of the zone or the entire flow of the zone. So you should get the same numbers for that. Same thing with the Drip line, again, you're just using a different conversion factor constant here, and you're using gallons per hour rather than gallons per minute, and your spacing times spacing. So that's kind of what I mentioned over here. You can use a similar formula for that. Okay, so for the gross precipitation rate example, so what we're doing here is we're counting each head flow, and this is going to be a 28 by 28 foot square. And so then just plug in the numbers. And so you have 490 degrees at 0.21, 4 at 180s at 0.42, and 1 at full circle at 0.84. Add them up, divide them out, and you get your 0.41 inches per hour, which is what we saw in that chart earlier. Which is interesting because this is 28 by 28 feet, but we have 14 foot spacing. So that fits that MP rotator 1000 nicely. Okay, so this would be the gross precipitation rate for your tech line or drip line. Again, you're just measuring the area and how many emitters you would have in there. So you have 231 times the 0.42 gallons per hour, and your spacing and your row spacing, and just multiply it out. So you can actually have fairly high precipitation rates with drip, but it's a matter of getting the water down into the root zone. There's a little different watering philosophy with drip than there is overhead, obviously, but I see a lot of the industry, when they program a drip zone, they don't really give it enough time to infiltrate to the root zone. Because if you think about how deep shrubs roots and tree roots are, you know, they're 1 to 2 feet down in the soil. And so you really have to have the time to let that water percolate through the soil to get down there. So, you know, the deep in frequent is really, you know, a good way to do that. I know I'm off a little bit on the precipitation rate and out of water, but it's pretty important to get that water down to the root zone. Okay, so then you have the net precipitation rate, which is you put the catch cans out to determine that. And that's really the only way you can do that. Because we know how to do the gross, we count up all the sprinkler heads, but you can see in this picture, we have a lot of overspray on the sides. That's not being accounted for into the net precipitation rate. So we want to know how much of that water is actually getting into the target zone. So the net precipitation rate is only measuring the water that's going to that target.
All right. A little bit of number crunching there if to figure out the precipitation rates, but important in you know, doing your irrigation scheduling, obviously. So looking at the irrigation system audit tools, again, you guys have seen these, but just kind of refresh on these. So roll into those, Doug. There we go. The catch cans, catch cups, there's kind of 3 common and kind of major styles out there. You know, the kind of also the great fallback is you can, you know, they say cat food cans or something to that effect. But that's you know, you got to still measure that water. So take that, if you're just using cans or some kind of uniform cup, you got to measure not only the catchment area, that the top of the cup or the top of the can, but then you have to you know, measure the water in it. So with the catch cans, like are shown here, those kind of expedite the process by already calculating that square inches of that the top of that can or cup, and then also you know, it has a measurement scale on the sides of each cup, and there's kind of pros and cons. They all of these work well, pretty complementary, you know. So pick the one you like, but and you can again do it yourself, but I wouldn't recommend it if you're doing much auditing. So next one. So these are the tools that you need to you know, perform the audit, you know, per the QWEL standard and Irrigation Association specification, either one. Flags typically used to mark out heads, the pitot tube to measure the pressure coming out of a rotor head, and then also a pressure gauge to go on spray heads, one or the other or both. A soil probe, measure root depth. That's an adjustment tool there. the bottom right corner, you've got your calculator, clipboard, stopwatch, phone. Those all are, or sorry, camera. Those all are on your phone. So that's kind of, you can have each of those out there with you in the field, but you can also, you know, obviously utilize your phone. The anemometer is kind of an interesting one. Let's see, I don't know if anybody wants to, well, we won't put out a question on chat or a question up there for people to respond to, but the anemometer is so that you can determine wind speed. Wind can very much throw off an audit and give you bad data, basically. So the limit to doing a DU catch cup audit is, with wind speed wise, is 5 miles an hour. So, which is like, for a lot of places, it's like, when is it not blowing 5 miles an hour or more? So that can affect the time of day you can audit, or even, you know, a lot of times when we are going out to do audits, especially larger scale, it's like we're looking at the wind forecast very carefully. So, and again, if you're over 5 miles an hour, that data starts to become questionable and maybe, you know, not even valid at all. So, you know, that's the purpose for an anemometer. They have handheld ones. Those work, you know, pretty well. They're not super expensive, but need one of those. And then measuring tape. I think it's wheel if you're doing bigger areas, for like rotors in particular, but measuring tape to measure the distance between heads. You need your whole own audit toolbox, you know, so it's a little different than the regular toolbox. So yeah, roll on to the next slide there. So site evaluation, need to look at the site and the irrigation system that you're looking at evaluating. You can do that remotely, but it's not nearly as good, or not really all that useful. I mean, you need to, you know, be on the ground in the area to be audited to gather these different site you know, site information that's relevant to conducting a good audit. So and then also you know, and do a visual inspection, of course, of the irrigation system, not just the landscape material and that kind of thing. You need to look at everything. But again, in that, I'm going to skip back up to the middle there. It's good to look at your plant material, your microclimates, your soil types, slope. You know, microclimates would be especially kind of sun, shade, part sun or part shade, that kind of thing. Soil types, of course, and the slope. All those are important as far as, you know, water use and how to apply water. And then another thing that's valuable on an existing site, of course, is get water use records, because you can tell how much water and how water has been used on that site, more so the site than the zone or station. But that's really valuable, especially auditing a existing system. So one of the things in looking at the irrigation system is to activate the hydro zones, observe issues, document those, and either resolve those or include those in the audit report. Usually the auditor is not supposed to, unless you're kind of self-auditing or auditing for your own purposes, auditor is not really supposed to be making corrections. But anyway, can definitely note those. We'll kind of touch on something there here in a little bit about kind of looking at the site before you are really truly auditing, getting it ready, tuning it up. Take photographs. Those are helpful when you're not on site to be able to reference and look at, and also to share with a customer or a client that has, you know, that you're auditing their site. Show them things, or show the landscaper or irrigation installer kind of what you're seeing or what you're concerned about. Determine the water budget for the hydro zone or the area. Compare that to the water use records if available. Again, that's kind of easier to do on a you know, for an entire site, like, you know, gathering your square footages and comparing that, you know, how much water should you be using to the water budget, basically, and to actual use. And then the cost of water actually is really helpful too, because it helps customers understand what it's costing them to be putting down the water. So yeah, necessary information. So next one, please. So I'm going to talk about the system audit and the tune-up, so that we think this is pretty critical to, you know, whether you got a brand new system and it's like, well, it's brand new, it doesn't need to be tuned up, or an existing system, usually definitely good to be tuned up. We encourage our customers we want to see the irrigation system in its normal operating condition, like what it normally is like. We don't really want somebody to go in and have it super tuned up if that's pretty rarely the case. Although to do a good audit, we want to see that the system needs to be working and working well. So do encourage strongly people to do this. One of the things, yeah, you need to, you know, the tune-up is depending on, again, the goals and parameters of the audit, what we're looking for, what we're trying to do, may kind of impact kind of what kind of system tune-up you do. On a new landscape, before I forget it, I think it's a really key point. We get called out to do an audit on a new landscape, and one of the classic things is that they have new turf, new sod down, and they've been watering it. And, you know, so, which is all fine and good, except for they haven't mowed it. So a lot of times we get called out, we say, hey, we're going to be there Wednesday morning, and we get there and the grass is 6 inches tall and the heads are, you know, hopefully they're popping up 6 inches. That would be great. That's the right ideal. If, you know, to have an efficient spray head, it should pop to 6 inches really. But a lot of times we see 4 inches, and if the grass hasn't been mowed or you know, maintained, all of a sudden you're kind of dead in the water. It's like it's pointless to do an audit at that point. So then it's like, okay, you got to get this place mowed, call us when you're done, you know. So kind of save yourself in a second trip to make sure that it has been mowed, you know, within, you know, last 2, 3, 4 days for sure. So so we're looking for operating pressure within the manufacturer specifications. So high pressure or low pressure obviously is going to impact system working right and your DU numbers. Correct filtration and pressure regulation. If those are supposed to be there, filters in particular and drip, but also pressure regulation for, you know, both drip and the sprays and rotors. And then head-to-head coverage again. But if it's been properly designed, which it should be, and especially with the Aspen Wells program, there's an irrigation plan has to be submitted, and it was probably put together by, what's required to be put together by a certified designer. So it's, you know, the head-to-head coverage shouldn't be an issue, but if the installer didn't put it in that way, it could be an issue. So check in for that. On existing landscapes, existing irrigation systems, it says use caution and judgment to make small adjustments. So just getting the system ready and in a good shape. Again, water pressure should be in the, you know, kind of in the proper ranges, not extreme high or low, of course. Looking for clogged nozzles, as somebody mentioned earlier, totally would impact DU. So want that to be resolved or taken care of. Heads and arcs out of alignment. If again, the heads are tilted, or if the arcs are, you know, we're spraying half the sidewalk with a head, that's obviously not correct, and trying to get that corrected and adjusted. Plant obstruction, we call it, or anything else that's obstructing the flow, whether it's a, you know, tree or a sign or a, you know, mailbox or whatever, making sure that's not an issue, because that will affect the DU and impact the DU. And then if there are emitters missing is another thing that can, especially obviously on drip, be an issue. So the bottom point, again, when we're going out to do an audit, third-party audit, you know, you have to decide is it even makes sense to proceed with this audit, because it's kind of clearly not going to pass, or is not to code or to standard, or, you know, there's a lot of pressure to get this, you know, these certificate of occupancy and getting the proper DU. So you know, a lot of times it's good to have the landscaper or irrigation installer there if they can be, because they can, one, learn from what's going on in the audit, but really they can make some corrections on the fly, which it's not really the auditor's job to sit around and drink coffee waiting for the system to be corrected. It should be correct when the auditor shows up. But you know, it's a lot kind of more efficient for everybody if you can get the corrections made, make those minor adjustments as are listed there in the middle, and you know, come up with an accurate and good DU, and then go from there. So that's on that.
So real quick on the heads and spray arcs out of alignment, that is a good topic, because if you have a rotor head that's got a 3-gallon nozzle in it and it's a 180-degree arc, but it's out of alignment, so it's doing a 200-degree arc now, that also throws off your precipitation rate, and it directly affects your uniformity, because now you have a larger area and that nozzle has to rotate back and forth. So it's basically watering the non-target area. So if, you know, one sprinkler head that's out of arc can mess up the entire uniformity. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the auditing of the system itself.
Hey, Doug.
Yes.
Amber has a question up there that I think is a good question before we move on. Okay. Just talks about pressure. Do you want to answer that, or you want me to?
We can do it together if you'd like. It says, thanks, Amber, for the question. For questions, I've also heard the desire to have pressures from city mains be representative of typical operation time. Given that most systems are run at night, is that a concern, or how is that accounted for? So if you're referring to the difference in pressures at nighttime, Amber, because they're higher pressures, or you have a water window within that time frame?
Both, I think, you know, peak demand for city systems are usually higher during the day, so the pressures should be slightly lower, whereas at night we don't really have competition. So I don't know if that is actually a concern, but I've heard that mentioned, and other than auditing at night, I don't know how you account for that.
Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, your pressures are definitely going to be different during the daytime. The systems are typically programmed to operate at nighttime, and there is that. We've done pressure tests on systems because of that, where we record the pressure through several days, so we can get those pressures at nighttime. But you're absolutely right. How are you going to test that with a catch cup uniformity test if you're not doing it when the system runs? So yeah, I don't know if there's really any way to compensate for that.
I think you can, find out from in that locale and that, water provider, and it might even be different parts of the distribution system are different as well within, like, say, City of Aspen, but you can find out what are the pressures, running, or what pressures are they trying to keep in the lines during the day, and then also at night, almost like what's the pressure like at 12 noon and what's the pressure like at 12 midnight. I think that's available. Do you, Mary, do you know what that is, or anybody else from the city? Do you guys know what, from Aspen, do you guys know what your pressures run during the day, during the night?
I don't think we have that specific data, but in theory, they should be similar because we don't allow irrigation during the day. And so if peak demand is within households during the day, we're trying to shift that demand for irrigation to the evening. So they should be similar, but it's a great question. We should look into it.
Yeah, if you have an answer, I think that is helpful. Like Amber says, I mean, it's definitely helpful for the auditing, but also helpful for irrigators and landscapers to know what that is, like, hey, yeah, the pressure drops or the pressure goes up. And, especially if it's quite high or quite low, then that's, but even if it's kind of in the middle, it's helpful to know where that's at, because pressure is has a lot to do with how the system or irrigation performs.
For sure. At the lunch break, I'll try to give one of our pump guys a call and see if they have any more info.
Right.
I mean, they typically do their work during the day too, so
we'll see. But even so, I mean, you'd have to do the test, to get, if you have a different pressure differential, you'd have to do the test 2 different times at 2 different pressure differentials to see what the uniformity difference is. You can't throw a multiplier at it.
Yeah. And I do think I would guess different parts, there's booster pumps and, elevation and different things in even the city's irrigation, all municipal providers, their distribution network, that they have great pressure in certain parts of the city and other places not so much based on their infrastructure. So anyway, so it's site specific when it gets down to it too. So
if I'm remembering correctly, I believe at our hydrants, which is where the fire department determines the rate, it's generally around 100, if I recollect right. I could be wrong, but that's what I'm remembering.
It depends on where.
Yeah, when you start getting with the pumps and stuff, especially.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'll try to find out some more info during the break, and if not today, then it's definitely something we should look into.
All right.
Thank you for that question, Amber.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Yours, Doug.
Okay, so we're going into irrigation system testing. There are plenty of forms available to record your data. We actually prefer a tablet app that we use. It's just basically an Excel spreadsheet, but it calculates the data for us and helps us keep the data all in one place. And as Bob mentioned earlier, some of those tools, we have timers and we have cameras and we have all the different things on our tablet that allow us to have fewer things carry around in the field. So the first thing you want to do is draw a diagram of the area. A lot of times what I do is I print out a Google map, a Google Earth map, so I can see the outlines from the map. You want to put the overall dimensions, head locations, head spacing, catch can locations on there. I usually flag out the sprinkler head locations, and then I'll take photographs of that. And then also I'll put my cans out, and then you can see here when they have an X, I'd still do a graphical image, even though I've got my tablet. I'll print out my Google Earth map, and instead of putting an X here, I'll number those. So I'll know that this is can number 1, number 2, number 3, 4, etc., and then in a row. So when I collect the water, the data, then I'll know that if there's a dry spot somewhere, I can look at my map and say, well, these 2 cans right here had lower amounts than these 2 cans, and then see if there's some way to rectify that. So I'll know exactly where those dry spots were. Again, you want to use your anemometer to check the wind speed, and with the wind is just so dang unpredictable. You'll have a perfectly calm morning. You'll throw your cans out there, and then inevitably you start the test, and the wind kicks up, a couple of gusts or something like that, just to kind of mess with you. But if it's too bad, you'll unfortunately have to dump the cups and start over. But if you're 5 miles an hour or less, you can continue on and then make a judgment call on maybe, and I don't recommend this, but making an adjustment based on that wind. But if it's just a small gust, I mean, that's how life is. So hopefully it's a good uniform test anyway, and you won't have to do that. So the run the zone. Yeah,
sorry. I also, and the wind is, I think the wind is borderline, or if you're in gusty, I mean, like it's, up and down, up and down, up and down, I think at the very least, if you're going to try to push the audit through, it's like you need to make a notation to the customer, because it, and to actually probably install the installer, because if there is an installer involved, because it's kind of like you could have some, again, bad data if it's over 5 miles an hour. So if you're going to, I don't know, we did not recommend it, but if you are auditing when it's over 5 miles an hour, at the very least, you need to, make everybody aware of that's involved. So in your report.
And if the wind is blowing so hard that it's blowing your catch caps over, you have to come back another day.
And has never seen that happen, Doug.
Okay, so you want to place your catch cans in the zone to be tested, obviously. You want to have a minimum of 24 catch cans. 20, or you can use a larger number, but a minimum of 24. It's best if you have it as a number divided by 4, that can be divided by 4 for easy math. If you have 26, really that's okay. If you have, you can just, you'll still be able to make the divisions, but 4 just gives you that lower quarter easier. So leave about 2 feet between the spray can and the catch can, or spray body rather. You don't want the catch can interfering with the spray pattern. That can do, well, obvious thing, knock the can over, you'll get more water in the can, it'll deflect the spray pattern, etc. So, you know, go out away from the head so that it's not interfering with the spray pattern. Lay them in a uniform grid, space them approximately 5 to 8 feet on center for rotary sprays, and 10 to 20 feet for rotors. So again, you know, the larger the area, the farther the heads are spaced, and then if you have the same number of cans, a minimum of 24, they're just going to be spaced farther apart.
And Doug, on that,
yep.
I was, I know again in Aspen, we were doing an audit on a tree lawn, or the strip of grass between the sidewalk and the street, and it was not large, not small square footage, and I mean it was 3 or 4 feet wide, which is, you know, a whole nother story about DU and things, but that had to be audited. And so, you know, when you look at space cans 5 to 8 feet apart, it was like we had cans. Yeah, but you got to do it. You got to get 24 cups in that area. So you know, your cans are a foot apart, you know, even. So that's pretty crazy tight, but that's what you got to do. So
right. Based on the area.
Based on the area. So
and then pull the flags, because they will obstruct the spray pattern in some cases. So I put the flags out, drop the cups, and pick the flags up before I run.
Useful to take pictures of that before you turn it on with your flags out, your cups out. It's real helpful.
Right. Now, see on this one, somebody, probably me, didn't pick up those flags ahead of time, like I just said to do.
That looks like one of yours, Doug.
Yeah, they're on the back side of the part circle, so it's not.
That's not one of yours. I know that. I'm just.
So you need to run the zone for to get a sufficient amount of water in the cup. You know, and it differs. You know, if it's a spray head, we looked at the precipitation rates earlier, or a rotor head. This says 5 to 10 or 10 minutes for rotors. That's usually pretty good. I usually try to target about 25 mils in the cup, just so it's easier to read. Plus, I don't know if you saw those pictures of those catch cups earlier, but there are markings on those, but they're like extremely difficult to see. So we go through with a magic marker and mark 25. We mark like every 5 milliliters on our cups. So you can see real easy when you pick up that cup how much water's in there. Anyway, just a little trick. The other thing is if you have a zone, say like on a ball field like this, where full circle sprinklers may be adjacent to these part circle sprinklers, and you have to run both zones to get the proper uniformity, then you're going to have different run times. So if you calculate the gross precipitation rate, you could calculate for that, call it 25 mils, or maybe a half an inch of water, or not a half an inch, but like 1/10 of an inch of water, how long your run time would need to be for both that full circle and that part circle zone, because they may have the same size nozzles, but they're just designed to run different lengths of time. So you just have to know what your nozzles are, how long to run those to get an accurate test. Okay, here's our video, Lindsay.
This is an audit, and world's fastest audit right here. So, but it's helpful to kind of again see it again more in real life, real time.
Uh-oh, what happened? We have to watch politics now.
No.
It could be buffering.
It says update link.
Now I got to put on my mask and my earplugs and my nose plug.
It looks like the video is a little off-centered too, Doug. I don't know if there's a way to make it, to adjust it.
Here, hold on a second.
Yeah. And then.
Let's see, is there a way I can maximize that?
That's good.
Yeah, this is actually better. You could just
Is
leave
that
it
okay?
in. You could just leave it in this presenter mode.
If you guys are interested in a link, we could give you the link to that, but
Yeah, I'll be sure to share the YouTube link after the course as well.
get some crazy pressures that just you're like, there's no way that's the pressure I'm supposed to have here. It's amazing on an existing site, especially. Nice to do this on warm days, as you guys probably know. Looks like the trees are blowing. Not in that picture. Little tilt, a little overspray, clog.
See, those are some of the things you'd fix before you do an audit.
And again, kind of depends. You may want to see it in its raw condition, or, you know.
If you want to make a comparison between before and after, that would be a good way to do it.
The auditing process, if you've done it, it's pretty tedious. It's a lot more time consuming and involved than I think a lot of people think to do proper DU audit. So made it.
Let's see, I think I can go. No. Okay, so after you do the exercise like they showed you, then you calculate the uniformity by using the average catch can volume depth of the lowest quarter and the depth of all cans and dividing it out, and then that gives you your DU. So I'm going to speed up a little bit. You guys are all familiar with this as you are as QWEL certified. So again, you have the net precipitation rate. For the precipitation rate, you're doing the catch can volume of all cans times 3.66 divided by the run time and the catch can throat area. So if you're using a tuna can or one of the Utah state catch cups, you just have to put in different information on that. If you're using inches or centimeters, that would be your tuna can because you just measure it in inches with the ruler. Then you just put the different multiplier in there. Here's some examples. Again, you have your can numbers labeled, and then you have your catchments in there. And if the cans are noted on your map, then you can come back and see if you have the low ones, what can they were in, and then you can go back and see if there was something that you may be able to fix there easily to improve that DU.
Usually you're running 5 to 20 minutes, I would say roughly, the zone when you're doing this. So
Yeah. And it's not, in my opinion, not practical to do uniformity on drip irrigation systems. And that's only because they are not applying the water to a broad area. They're doing it in a very localized area. You can do the precipitation rate for it because you know how big the area is and how much water is going out. But again, the water is being applied completely differently than it would be on a overhead sprinkler. As you can see here, you can see where the wetted patterns are. This would be a turf zone at some point. But in order for this obviously would not be uniform because you have zero water here at this point. So you're relying on soil infiltration and capillary action to get that water to these 2 points. And the way that water travels through the soil is it goes down first and then out a little bit. But when these 2 patterns right here meet, then it will go further down into the soil. So in order to get a uniform coverage on this, it has to be pretty much saturated before you can do that. And it's not really any easy way or accurate way to do a uniformity test on that. Rob?
do we want to do this now or after lunch? What are we thinking?
You guys tell me. I mean, I only have 4 slides, so I can knock it out now, or we can come back from lunch.
Let's go ahead and do that after lunch. I think everyone probably wants to stretch their legs. One question came up from Brett. Did we address this? The app you use on your tablet?
Doug, you got that?
I'm sorry, what was it? I didn't see
The question from Brett there.
Which app do you use to do the audit on your tablet?
It's the Irrigation Association app.
Excellent. Okay. So we are going to pause here for 30 minutes. So we'll reconvene at 12:40, and I'll put that in the chat. I will be doing a roll call at 12:40, and this QWEL, this Zoom webinar is going to remain live. I'm just going to mute myself and turn off video so you all can do the same, or you can leave and then rejoin. So we'll meet back here at 12:40. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
General contractor or someone who is hammering everyone to get the permit wrapped up. So you'll probably just provide it to whoever the contact, you'll provide your audit report to whoever contacted you to perform the job, and they'll put the whole packet together. Sometimes Rick, I imagine Rick will reach out directly to an auditor if he has questions on an audit report, but for the most part, I don't think auditors actually submit through our Salesforce.
Yeah, that's pretty much true. I do communicate a lot with auditors and contractors and developers. What I'm trying to get people to do for consistency is to submit, like you referred to, Rob, everything as a package, because in the beginning I was getting audits from one party, approval letter from another, other information from the contractor, so at different times. So it became really confusing. So I just asked, it's not in the wells, but I asked that it be submitted as a whole package. That way I can review it fairly quickly, get out to do the inspection fairly quickly, and hopefully get to the CO faster. Anyway.
Everyone wants that CO faster.
Yeah, particularly this time of year.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions for Rob? You can either send them in the chat or ask them out loud here.
I have another question. It's what happens if that is essentially like the audit fails, or the DU calculations, you know, come up substandard. What do you guys, how do you handle that? And again, it's under the pressure of getting the CO. So of course, so.
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. I'd say the large majority of the inspections that I've done, the DU has been in line, with a couple of exceptions. Last year, I had to have them come back and catch can a turf area, one zone, because it was below 0.65 DU, which is required by the wells. Recently, I did one last week where the system was blown out. One rotor was at 0.55 in turf, and I could tell that perhaps it was installed correctly or something. So I kind of made an exception and approved for CO, yet made a note that they'll have to come back and catch can that one zone in the spring. I don't think I'll do that very often, but you know, we try to be flexible in those cases. We understand how important it is for people to get COs and how much pressure is on not only them, but us to do so sometimes. Does that answer your question, Bob?
Yeah. I do think, yeah, I think, you know, obviously when we've done audits kind of under that scenario, basically, I mean, the installer, you know, probably needs to like kind of try to immediately correct it. If you can figure, you know, you don't need to issue a report that's you know, I mean, that's, you know, with the correct data, of course, but that is not meeting the well standards. And then it gets kind of kicked back, and then, you know, you might as well try to, if possible, correct it, you know, immediately, and almost like retest it, which, yeah.
Right, you know, and that kind of leads into what Rob was talking about and you're referring to, and that's the punch list recommendations part of the audit has proven to be very valuable, in my opinion, in doing just what you described. Any, you know, inconsistencies or problems with DU really should be corrected before I go out and look at it. And largely that has been the case. The large majority of the time, there's been at least one, maybe 4 or 5 punch list items that are corrected before I get there. And I think that's a really valuable part of the wells audits in general.
Another thing on the wells program, I know that at least how I remember going through it is that, again, the auditor is auditing, but wasn't responsible for the, you know, proper design or proper installation. And the designer, I think, and I'm sure if not just the designer and possibly the installer sign off that it was installed properly. I mean, kind of designed properly and installed properly, or per plan. So
that's right.
As an auditor, it's not, you know, it's not really my responsibility to, you know, they need to be catching themselves, the designer and installer, not the auditor.
True, but there is a punch list requirement, and I typically, don't you guys fill that out, or at least indicate what a problem was and how it was fixed? That's what I've seen a lot from other auditors.
Yeah, no, definitely we'll do that, but
yeah,
again,
that's great.
Yeah. So, and
really helpful.
Ideally, it's, you know, it's sort of the installer is there, and maybe even the designer, and then it's kind of corrected on the fly. And so it's, the punch list is, there's nothing to go on the punch list. So perfect world.
Right. Okay. Understood. Yeah.
All right, if there are no more questions, then let's go ahead and move on to improving our system uniformity and efficiency.
Right. Thanks, Lindsay. So irrigation system tune-up, again, it kind of depends. We talked about this earlier. These depends on what you're trying to achieve in the system tune-up, and it's kind of like back to the wells audit. It's the audit. The system should be ready to go. You don't want grass that's 6 inches tall. I audited a site in Aspen, and the lateral line on the drip hadn't been connected. I mean, can't really do an audit on that. So anyway, just it needs to be kind of ready to go. And again, what are you trying to achieve? Are you really, like on an existing landscape, a lot of times we may not look at DU so much as just that the system is operating efficiently and that the components of the system are in an efficient, kind of state, shall we say, when we go through a system. So that's up to that number one point, is like, what are you trying to accomplish, or what needs to be accomplished by the audit? If it's DU, you need to do DU to whatever standard. And if it's just how do we make the system work better, use less water, be more efficient, then that same but different, I guess, and especially on an existing system. So that's good.
Yeah. So if you come across a system with a leak like this, that's not something that they can typically fix while you're waiting. Obviously you can't do a DU test on something like this. So you move on. Broken heads are the same situation. If you have a broken head, it's just as impactful as a leak itself.
We do audits of existing systems, and we'll have clients that say, well, you just told me I had broken heads. It's like, well, that's highly inefficient. And, a property manager or HOA board or whatever, if until that's documented, somebody's really identified that, you don't, everybody thinks everything's normal or fine. You would, as a customer, think, I don't have broken heads, or I don't have these issues. And that's, it is what it is. I mean, hopefully we don't find issues. That's the ideal thing. And if an audit is when we're doing an efficiency audit, we don't find a lot of issues. Right. This is a head at your house, isn't it, Doug?
Yep. This is how I do my radius adjustment. And the nozzles, the streams that come out of these nozzles are engineered by the manufacturers to not have any disruption in them. And so that even accounts for what I call the nozzle disruption screw, or the radius reduction screw. Sometimes it's a nozzle retention screw. But anyway, it's the screw on top of the head that screws down and breaks up the pattern of the head. And anytime you touch that stream of water that's coming out, it's going to impact your uniformity.
Hey, John, does CPS sell those blue screws?
No blue screws, but I think I've got some drywall sitting in the back we probably with.
Anyway, it's amazing what we see, of course.
Yeah. So in order to get your uniformity up, there's several things. I think we've got a list of 6, and they're all important. I don't know if some are maybe more important than others, but they all play a part in it for sure. And so we're going to go through them, and you can probably move these around as far as importance goes. But number 1 for us is raising the heads to proper grade. So anytime you see the grass laying down like this, we call that a rotor crater. And it's just so low that the head itself is hitting the blades of grass. So like I mentioned in the previous slide, anytime you have something that's interfering with the stream coming out of the spray head, or rotor head rather, then that's going to impact the uniformity. And I guess that's true with spray heads as well. So the first thing we want to do is get these heads up to grade. So whether that means going in, there's several different ways to do that, but you dig it up, you maybe put a riser extension on there, recompact it. There's some gizmo, I'll call it a gizmo, but there's some parts that you can snap on the top of these to kind of raise the riser out of the body higher. But the bottom line is you want to get that up to grade so that it clears the grass. And including, and Bob even mentioned it, so we go out to an audit site and somebody's trying to get signed off on their project and they're like, yeah, get this done. And we go out and the grass is 6 inches tall. It's like, well, you're never going to pass this. So it's kind of the same thing because that grass is interfering with the nozzle stream. And there's your broken head again. So here's another one in operation for that low head. And you can see just how much the pattern is being disrupted by that tall grass and that low grade. So here's a picture of a good one, a good head at a sports field. This is actually one of Rainbird's glamour shots, if you will, that they put in their catalog, I think. But you can see though how it's raised up enough to where you're not getting any disruption of that. But then you can also see how all this water is falling down. So the water, once it leaves the nozzle, we really don't have any control over it, okay? We can control it all the way up through the nozzle. Then it's gravity, wind, obstructions, and things like that that will affect that uniformity. So this is a project that I was just on a month or so ago, and the same type of head. And so, I mean, it's kind of nice that you can actually see the real McCoy out there. And this has got a really nice uniformity and droplets on this particular head. The spacing was right on. I don't usually see this, so I was pretty happy about it. So I took pictures of it. And for a rotor zone, I think this zone right here actually got into the mid 80s for uniformity, which is really good. In fact, I've got a picture here. Let's see. So you can kind of see how the droplets are falling as soon as it comes out. But even so, you'll see there's a little bit of misting up here. The pressure's just a little bit high, so we're losing a little bit to wind drift, yet we were still getting a pretty good uniformity out of it. And then there's also this style here. This is the rotary stream spray that we talked about earlier. And everybody's kind of familiar with those, that they rotate around and you can adjust them for the arc. And the nice thing about these compared to the single stream rotors is that they're match precipitation. So that means when you adjust the radius or you adjust the arc, then it's adjusting the flow as well. So if you're adjusting the radius down, the flow is being decreased, so you're maintaining that match precipitation rate, which keeps your uniformity intact. Okay, this next one is an interesting concept. I don't think it's quite the mainstream market yet, but we saw this at one of the shows a couple years ago, and it's it's pretty unique. Let me see if I can get it to go here. Because they're touting that there's one sprinkler and you won't need head-to-head coverage. Let me see if I can get it to go. There it goes. Try that again. But when we asked them a little bit about their uniformity, they dodged that question pretty quick. But it's kind of an interesting concept. It's a computerized head that only targets the area you want to irrigate. So it's kind of a neat concept. If they can work out some of those bugs, it's pretty interesting. Let's see here if I can get out of here now. Sorry about that. Okay, we'll go on to the next one. Okay, so how do we measure the pressure at a head? So there's a couple different ways you can do that. And with the spray heads, the best way to do that is with this gauge. This happens to have a 100 gauge on it, but you can put whatever gauge you want on there, of course. What happens is you unscrew the nozzle, you screw it on the riser stem, and you put the nozzle back on. and then you can see what that operating pressure is. So that way you know if your pressure is too high or too low or whatever it might be. So the other way, it's kind of rudimentary, but what I've done for a lot of years, when I go out on a site and the pressure looks kind of low, I do what I call the 2-finger test. So if the zone is operating, I'll just take 2 fingers and push down on that riser. And if I can push that stem down with 2 fingers, your pressure is probably lower than 30 pounds. And these nozzles, the spray nozzles, typically like 30 PSI, but it is good to get the exact number so you can see where you're at. Rotor heads are a little more challenging. You can put what they call a pitot tube in the nozzle stream. And the challenge is that a couple of things. Well, first of all, your rotary head is rotating. And so you're trying to chase that nozzle around, and you want to get this pitot tube. So there's this little bitty piece right here. See if I can get it right here that you want to get in that stream. And it has to be pretty consistent, because if it turns at all, then you're not getting the full pressure of the stream coming in, and your pressure is going to fluctuate. And then the other challenge sometimes is your nozzle has got veins in it. Now you don't really want to put this thing in the nozzle, but if you're touching the nozzle, it's a little more steady, because if you have 70 pounds coming out of that nozzle stream, it's pretty hard to keep that thing steady and then get an accurate pressure. And it also is it can be kind of wet. You can get it will spray back at you. So, but anyway, that's one of the ways that you get the nozzle, or excuse me, the pressure out of a rotary nozzle. And you also can check it at the backflow preventer. So this is an RP here, and we've got the gauge on the downstream side of the checks. And you can see here, so we're about 50 pounds. And I think that's actually a static pressure. So the thing is with the heads, when you're doing those 2 tests, those are going to be dynamic, because you're checking the pressure of the water coming out of the nozzle after all the friction losses through the system. So that's dynamic pressure. This one you can do either way. So the difference is going to be you're not going to be able to see all the friction losses downstream of this just through the meter and the backflow. But anyway, you'll be able to check your dynamic, and then when the system's off, you can check your static here as well. Okay, so what do you do if your pressure is too high? This is bad. So you have your excessive operating pressure. You're going to get misting of your water droplets. They just float away, prone to wind drift. You get a lot of overspray and poor DU. So how do we manage that? There are different methods of managing it. A lot of them are in the head. And in fact, Colorado now has a law that all sprinkler bodies must have in-stem pressure regulation now. And so there are different pressures. The one on the left is actually not regulated. So I don't even know if you're allowed to buy those anymore. But it would have no regulation. And these happen to be Hunter brand. I'm not picking on, they're not picking on, but they're using one manufacturer or the other. This is just was a good picture. But theirs are color coded. So you can see they have the black, the brown, and the gray. And then they use the brown one for the 30 PSI regulation for a normal spray head. And then they use a 40 PSI regulator for the stream nozzle, the rotary sprays. And so that way you're ensured you're getting the right pressure for the nozzle, the optimum operating pressure of those nozzles. John just from Grand Junction Pipe said the law goes into effect on January 1st, 2021. So thanks for that, John. So you're not on the hook yet, but if you're buying them in the wintertime, stocking up for next year, you might rethink that anyway. It's a good idea to have them anyway. I know that they're cheaper if they don't have the pressure regulation, but it's a good thing. You can also regulate the pressure at the control valve. So if you have really excessive pressure in your main line, like 100 pounds, someone mentioned earlier, and that's what you have for your irrigation main line as well, this type of regulator is not that good at regulating that high of pressure. So this can probably regulate between, I'd say 20 to 30 pounds above the target. So if this was a 30 PSI regulator, I would say between 50 and 60 pounds. And then this one, the same thing, is going to be a little bit higher than that, so 60 to 70 pounds. But when you get to this type of regulator, you can regulate it at the control valve and bring your lateral dynamic pressure down so that the heads don't have to work as hard to get the pressure to that optimum pressure. So again, this is Hunter. Rainbird, of course, has them as well. But I was using their catalog, I guess. But anyway, so what this does is it just screws into an adapter underneath the solenoid, and it just limits the amount of water that can get through that valve. So by doing that, you're limiting how wide open the diaphragm in this valve opens. So you're basically just creating a friction loss in there. So you can do it with a 30 pound or a 40 pound. Again, those are for the spray heads or the rotary heads, or there's an adjustable one as well. So maybe you have like a rotor, a single stream rotor head that you want a little bit higher pressure on there. You can put this in and then adjust it on there. And I have a video here, and again, I apologize for all the Hunter materials. But anyway, this is a really good video that shows how effective those pressure regulators are. So let me see if I can start this without. Then it does get a little commercial, so I'll back off a minute. You can see that misting. Okay, so they're just going to go through how many gallons you're going to save, but the point of that was that for the pressure, it directly impacts the flow. So if you have a 20% increase in pressure, there's going to be a 10% increase in flow. And that's why it's so important. And Rob mentioned it earlier. If you change out a head on or a head to a high efficiency head, nozzle, anything like that on a zone, you have to change them all. Because if you don't, then you're going to have one head that's operating different than the other. And that's going to impact your uniformity. So I advance to the next slide. And another way to look at to adjusting the pressure is to look at the regulator that's at the meter. So sometimes you'll have, if it's, now let's just say if it's a residential type situation or even a commercial building, there may be a regulator ahead of the backflow preventer that serves the building. And plumbers like to put those at 50 PSI because that's what plumbing fixtures work good at. But everybody on this call knows that it's nearly impossible to operate an irrigation system with 50 pounds, especially when you're before you go through your RP. So if you have it available and you can adjust it, check that pressure regulator. You can squeeze out a few more pounds, and then a lot of times that'll solve the problem. Okay, so what do you do if the pressure is too low? All right, so this is the infamous donut, and it's a telltale sign of low pressure on a rotor zone. And it's because if you don't have enough pressure to get those droplets to fall like that video that I showed you a while ago, then you're going to have a lot of water going out and a lot of water going right around the head and nothing in the middle. So you're not getting those droplet sizes to fall properly. All right, so let's talk about that. So if you don't have enough pressure, how do you get pressure? Well, there's only two ways to do that. You can do it with gravity, like a water tower. So you actually have to pump the water up this thing, and then it sets in here like an above ground reservoir, and then it comes down into this. Let me get my marker here. Okay, so then it would come down this main pipe, and that's how they serve the neighborhood and allow them to have water pressure. So there's gravity, and if you don't have gravity, then you have to use a pump, a mechanical pump. So if you don't have any, if you have a low pressure system and there's no way to increase that pressure, then you're gonna have to probably put a booster pump on there. So since the pressure that is delivered to you is what you have, how do you keep that? Well, it's not going to do, it can't go up, it can only go down. So you can limit the friction losses through the system to try to keep the pressure that you have. One of the things that you can do also is go back to that same pressure regulator, and maybe if it's, you know, you can adjust it up a little bit as well. We adjusted it down earlier, but we can adjust it up perhaps to get some more pressure there. Okay, another thing would be consider high efficiency nozzles. Now there's a lot of debate and resistance in the landscaping community about this, because the high efficiency nozzles typically they're lower flow. Okay, well that's two things. It does make lower friction loss because you're lowering your demand. However, it does also decrease your precipitation rate. And so when you decrease your precipitation rate, you're also increasing your runtime. So that's a lot of the conversation that I've had. It's like, well, we can't use those because we don't have the water window. And so that's where you need to have the conversation, especially with smart controllers today. I'm a fond proponent of them. And that's because they can, some of them can irrigate to a particular flow rate if you have a flow sensor on there, or even theoretical sometimes. But what that will allow you to do is maybe water multiple zones at one time. Now, again, you start watering multiple zones and then it increases your flow and then your friction loss. So it's kind of a balance. But the bottom line is that if you can increase the efficiency of the uniformity of the zone by putting high efficiency nozzles in, then maybe you can reduce your run times as well. So that would also impact your water window. In fact, it might be the same one. But anyway, you want to get your high efficiency nozzles, reduce your run time because you have a higher uniformity. Oh, there it's going again. I think we saw that one already. Okay, then we have, this is an older style, variable arc nozzle, adjustable arc nozzle, depends on who makes it. But these are not really known for their uniformity. In fact, you can even look at this and see how the spray pattern varies. And so you're not getting very much water out here in these areas. And they also apply water in a very heavy fashion, so you're more prone to runoff right away. So you really have to do the cycling on these particular heads.
Those are really convenient for the contractors to use, but it's not. It is a very inefficient nozzle. So,
and if you think about it, the rotary streams are also adjustable nozzles, so you can use those, and then you maintain that high efficiency. So they're called. Everybody is like they're high efficiency, but it's uniformity. And then back to the nozzle radius reduction screw. Again, like if anytime you break open that stream, you can see here again, you're flattening it out, and all that does, it does bring in your radius because you're breaking up this pattern, but it really affects your uniformity, and it also affects your precipitation rate, because now if this nozzle was spraying 35 feet previously and you want it to spray 30, well, now you're putting out that same gallonage because you haven't changed the nozzle or the flow. All you're doing is you're putting that same amount of water in a smaller area. So you could actually end up having a wet spot. We have another type of older head. This one you can see it's also low here. It's our favorite, the impact sprinkler. All right, so the head is too low. It doesn't have a very high pop-up, and it also is not very uniform. And again, going back to that stream, if you look at the slow motion, of an impact sprinkler. Every time that lever hits that stream, it's breaking the stream, and that's how it rotates. So it's a very clever concept, and it's a very old concept. You got to hear that sound, right? Here it is a long line. Every time it hits that stream, you're impacting the, no pun intended, you're impacting the uniformity. And for what it's worth, these are barely, I don't even think there's one page left in the catalog. You know, Rainbird was famous for those, we all know that. And they were even referred to as Rainbird heads for years and years. But the fact is, I mean, uniformity is the name of the game. And you can go through any manufacturer's catalogs. And I think, like I said, Rainbird has one page of maxi-pause left in their catalogs today. And the bulk of their heads are gear-driven rotaries. So I mean, that just tells you how much more uniform that type of head is. So you don't want to mess with the stream on those heads if you want a good uniformity. Okay, the next thing is the obstructions, and that could be anything from plant material. So there's actually a head in here. Let's see if I can get back to this here. Sorry. Okay, so there is a head buried in this shrub right here, and you can see that it's trying to irrigate some lawn out there, but again, it can't get through that shrub. You're not going to get any uniformity out there. It also looks like it's kind of misting in there a little bit as well. Utilities are another thing. So sometimes on new projects I've seen where the heads will be spaced per plan, but then all of a sudden there's a great big electric utility box right in front of it. That's like, well, that wasn't on the plan, but it didn't get moved or relocated. So, well, it's not going to work. So you'll probably want to relocate those heads around that utility box so that your coverage can improve. Which brings us into head spacing. Head spacing is critical as well. It's rotary streams can fix some problems in poor spacing situations only because they have a radius of basically you call it 14 feet to 35 feet, and you can mix and match them and maintain your precipitation rate and also the uniformity because once again you can adjust the radius and the arc and it'll also adjust the flow based on that, and then you'll still have a good uniformity. With spray heads, you're not so lucky because you have to change the nozzle to match a particular area. And so if you have poor spacing with spray zones, then you're pretty well shot, other than relocating heads to make them more consistent, or maybe perhaps changing out the nozzles and seeing if that helps at all. I'm not sure what was going on here exactly, but there's no head in between these two here, and these are, I don't know, 4 feet apart. So that's obviously not going to work. I'm not sure what plan they were looking at when they installed that, but it certainly had to be corrected. So the head-to-head spacing, we talked about that earlier. And again, if your head is spraying its stream out, most of the water looks like it's going out here away from the head. But the truth is that this area of turf is a lot larger than the area around the head. So even gravity is pulling down the droplets here. You're getting more water here, even though that it looks like it's less water. So then in order to even that out, you want to have an opposing head spraying back to the other head. So that's typical head-to-head coverage, and that's why we have to do that. And then here's that picture again showing some pretty good proper head spacing and head-to-head coverage. Okay, so next we're talking about those match precipitation rates. We did talk a little bit about that in the first slide, or the first section rather. And again, if you have a 90-degree head with 0.21, your 180 has to be twice that. And the only way to do that on a rotor zone is to change the nozzle. Right, so what do you do if you have a 210-degree arc and you have a nozzle tree that's only got so many nozzles? So you kind of have to to kind of pick which nozzle you want to put in there. So if you have a 0.4 gallon nozzle on a 180 and a 0.63 on a 270, you might have to come in and say, well, maybe do I have a 4.5 or do I have a 0.5 gallon nozzle that I can put on that odd arc? And once again, this up to smaller, let's say 35 foot radius, you know, you can kind of adjust that with the rotary sprays. But once you get into those single streams, it's a little more difficult. So they do have, for single stream sprays, some match precipitation rate nozzles. So they come in a nozzle tree. Again, they have 4 nozzles, and you can put on, this happens to be a PGP with the, what do I have there? The 35 foot nozzles. And so you can, let me go back. What I'm doing here is I'm comparing. Sorry, I forgot what I did. This slide shows the standard blue nozzle performance and the MPR nozzle performance. So you notice that this on the left is shown in gallons per minute. And so you have a 2.5 gallon all the way up to a 5 gallon. There are more. I only took that section out because it was easier to read for this slide. But since there was a 5, maybe you could have used it on that last example that I showed. But with the MPRs, if you notice, they do it in arc. And then if you look at the flow rates, let's just use 45 PSI, they have a 35 foot radius for every single arc pattern. And then the flow rates double, almost, okay? Back over here, if you look at the radius at 45 PSI, notice these are bold and these are not, which is interesting. But you have a 45 PSI through the 2.5, you can only throw 35 feet. But on the 4, you're throwing 40 feet. All right, so you have a larger area, even though, let's go with the, these don't match up really well, but that should be not quite 2 times more. So that's where we're at for the flow. But look at our precipitation rate, how much it varies. Okay, and on the match precipitation, you have a pretty consistent 0.6, 0.58, 0.6, 0.6. So that's good, but you only have the option of these 4 arcs. So if you have any kind of a special arc, whether it's a, you know, an 80 degree or 135 degree or 240, you're kind of stuck. So then you kind of have to go back over to the standard nozzles and see what's going to fit in there to make my precipitation rate as close as I can get to these, which is going to help my uniformity. So nozzling is a pretty big deal on single stream rotors.
Doug, do you dream about those charts every night?
Oh my God, friction loss charts too. I love charts. So in summary, the methods to improve your uniformity are raise the heads to the proper grade and level, ensure the nozzles are match precipitation rate, eliminate spray pattern obstructions, correct the operating pressure, install higher efficiency nozzles, correct spacing and layout issues, and remember that DU is not the same as irrigation efficiency. And those are the things that we target whenever we see, even before when we run a system, it's like if they want to get a passing DU, we have to check all these things to make sure that the water is being applied uniformly. And with that, I think that brings us about to the end of our slideshow and our presentation.
I saw some comments circulating in the chat box. Were there any questions that have arisen for folks? I know we're right up against our time here related to this section or anything that you've heard today.
There's a question, if nobody has a question on any of that, or if they do, go ahead, please. But John asked the question, in the situation the system is not up to par, how are you approaching return trips to recoup time costs wasted? So John, on that, you were talking about kind of towards the audit mainly? Is that right? Yes, okay. So that's a great question, because it's pretty common to go out, and especially like in a well scenario, trying to hit, meet or exceed a certain, DU figures and numbers. Yeah, that should be part of, I guess, the proposal to the audit proposal to the contractor, to the developer, and just say, that, if we have to, this is if we just can go straight through, this is what the audit's, and if the system's ready to be audited when we get there and all that. But if we need to, and maybe even you put a time allowance per, for the process and for the report writing and everything else you need to do, and say, this is, assuming everything's working properly and there's no hesitations or delays, then this is the cost. And if there are delays not due to the auditor's issue, would probably be a way to say it, or not say that, but then how are you going to approach that? But yeah, just coming back to a site to re-audit and to be on the site when it's not windy, and that the wind would be another potential thing that maybe somebody wants to have written into their proposal. So if I show up and the wind's blowing too strong, I got to charge to come back. So anyway, good question.
We had another question come in here from Kathy Markle. Can you repeat what the new law requires? And is it only for new or also existing systems, and how will it be enforced?
Well, John and Linda also commented on the enforcement section of this, and again, it's not clear yet. And I'm wondering if it's going to be a commercial versus residential type enforcement, where maybe the distributors, and John, you could probably speak to this, are required to sell them or know better, and the box stores are not. Because it's like, if you look at, like, just for example, the Roundup killer, there's lots of regulations for a professional to use that, but any homeowner can go down and buy a gallon of it and pour it wherever he wants. And chain link fence, like in my neighborhood, our box store won't sell chain link fence because our homeowners association doesn't allow it. So they're regulating it at that level, but how do you regulate the sprinkler heads? I mean, we've all gone in and seen what kind of equipment that they sell there. And so that's a good, I'm not sure either on that at this point.
Well, and I've spent a fair amount of time looking at that law and reading how it's been proposed, and the state of Colorado has picked up a piece off of the water sense standards that the federal government has established. And the standards are fine, but there's definitely holes in the way the law is written, because they have not established any variances for raw water applications. They've not established any variances for any company that can sell them or not sell them. They've pretty well blanketed the entire industry that if anybody's caught selling them, there's penalties involved. But just like the big box stores that have a national presence, how that's going to be regulated is going to be interesting to see, because the penalties are quite substantial. How they have them written, it's $5,000 per head per incident is the written penalty, and then if you're selling them to anybody that's a at-risk individual, senior citizens particularly, that penalty can grow up to $10,000 per head per incident. So it's got some teeth as far as the penalties go, but how they're going to enforce it has no backbone to it yet.
Hey, yeah, I think again, trying to, put some pressure on them. I mean, and it's good that it's a statewide thing, not just a local, like like Castle Rock or, Denver or whatever. It's good that it's, or Aspen or whatever. It's good that it's a statewide, requirement, but need to figure out how to turn up the heat. Doug, what about I sort of talked about a little bit. I mean, that just now if you can only buy those heads, the pressure regulated heads, that's going to cause issues with, when you go to do a replacement or repair, and it's like you have unpressure regulated heads, and all of a sudden the only thing you can buy and legally install is a pressure regulated head. So
Yeah.
Comment on that?
Same comment we had before. It's going, definitely impacts the entire uniformity of the zone. If nothing was regulated before, and now you have to put in a pressure regulating head. So one other thing, you could do is if your pressure's high and you end up having to put in a regulating head, and you don't have any way to put in a pressure regulator at the valve, if it has a flow control, you can close that flow control down to manually create a friction loss through there and kind of adjust it. It does impact your flow a little bit, because that's what you're doing, is you're creating a friction loss by limiting your flow, but can help a little bit even it out. But other than that, no, you're kind of stuck. You're like what Rob said earlier, you change one, you change them all on that zone. Otherwise, you're gonna have a dry spot, and then you end up overwatering to compensate for that dry spot.
Any other questions?
Maybe perfect. So contact information is up for all of our fabulous presenters today. Thank you to our presenters and our participants for all this information and for your engagement. We really appreciate it. And this is something that we will continue to offer, hopefully annually, to our QWEL and Aspen graduates and others who are interested in participating. So, we'd love to hear from you if you have any feedback on this training, or if you have ideas for topics that you'd like to see in the future. Hopefully this time next year we'll be meeting in person. But lots of information still to be shared that can't be covered in 2 hours. So we'd love to hear your feedback, and please feel free to reach out to us. We're a little bit over our time here, so thank you for hanging on with us, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.